we are talking about the biggest mistakes to avoid with your hybrid events.
Oh yes, my favorite.
It's
I think there's a lot of mistakes that can happen, and so I know we talked about this previously, but we don't want to just talk about the mistakes. We want to talk about what we can do to mitigate those mistakes and what are like the main key takeaways. So we don't want to waste too much of your time on this because it's very important. If you are listening, make sure you're subscribed. So go ahead, Jon. What is the biggest thing that can go wrong with?
there's so many things, but the one that just jumps to mind the most is like really poor quality remote presentations.
Okay.
And there's so many ways they can go wrong. It can be the presenter's fault, it can be the host's fault, it can be just like technology, the world, but there
Mm-hmm.
is ways to avoid everything.
Yes.
And
And
so
to
not
clarify, that's like someone you're doing an event and
yeah,
someone's like dialing in or whatever, remoting
yeah,
in to
yeah,
like present their that's a true hybrid event where you have both things going on at the same
yeah.
time. So
Very common these days. But yeah,
mhm.
the mistakes, like I've rarely been to an event where they get it all right, which is crazy. Because like the info is out there, but people aren't just absorbing it.
Mhm.
But so like I think to look first, it's like let's look from the planner or like the host, like what they can avoid.
Mhm.
And so first thing I would put back to you is like as an online producer,
Mhm.
number one thing is the tech check, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what would you be checking in a tech check to make sure that a remote presenter was ready to go?
I mean, I think this goes back to like in general a better planning and being involved in the conversation before they bring in the tech person. One of the I know the tech checks are super important. They can be mitigated with a lot of tech focused people, but I also plan beforehand and make sure that is this remote presenter required to execute this event? That's the first question I always ask
Right.
because you're making it more complicated to do both, present to an in-person audience and have that all good, but also then bring in this other aspect that if you don't have the proper people involved or the proper planning, then it could be pretty much like not good for anyone. The presenter, the host, all the people in the event sitting there kind of giggling, what is going on, so yeah, the two ways to mitigate that request, just if there is a poor quality remote presenter, better planning. So bring in someone that knows some aspects of tech and also producing, because I think there's both
Yeah.
in there, and also making sure that there's a clear run of show. For example, I have one that it's gonna integrate both online and in-person audience, and the run of show details what is going to be happening during the intro part where like people are taking their seat, and that is clear for everyone, the MC, the speakers, the tech. It's not just like, oh, we'll figure it out when we're there, like what's going to happen. So that is a huge part of planning and to mitigate the risk.
Right. And then yeah, so I think like if you've tested with them beforehand, their video is good, their audio
Mm-hmm.
is good, they have a decent internet connection. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. So they're probably going to show up well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to look at though is like also the quality of their presentation. Like anybody that's
Mm-hmm.
been to a an event where there's a remote presenter knows that like a remote presenter is at a disadvantage when it comes to like connecting with the audience, with having energy. They have to have
Mm-hmm.
so much
Yeah.
on video, and that is
Mm-hmm.
not an easy thing to do. So like you can't be expecting to put just any person with any content on stage and have that be engaging at all for an in-person audience, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
making sure they have the energy is important. And then if you've set all that up right and like there's no other things have gone wrong, and then like the more remote presenters you have, the more chances that just something's going to go wrong for them on that day.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you have 10 people, maybe one of them is going to get caught in traffic. Their kids have to stay home from work or something else, or their kids have to stay home from school. They can't
Right.
make it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the best thing you can do to mitigate all risk there is by having
Mm-hmm.
everyone submit a video in advance,
Yes.
like as a backup, just so
Mm-hmm.
that if anything goes wrong, you can still at least play that video, and then maybe they can jump on later to do live Q&A or something like that. But
And I think there are solutions. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of virtual events, and you can set up a recording session prior to the event and do like a little Q&A, or some type of content that might integrate into the program as a backup or as a filler, as a buffer in between different segments of your event. And utilize the producer or a planner, event planner, to integrate that as part of your backup plan. But also, maybe it's a great video and they have great energy and we want to put it into the presentation as like a, it's a Q&A, whatever, before a panel. That's also possible. So I think there's a lot of ways that I think people just don't involve the producer or the planner too far in advance, because
right.
they want to save some money, but then they don't open up these possibilities of different ways to mitigate risks if
Right.
a presenter is not so great.
Yeah, got it. And what would you see as like the next biggest thing that could go wrong for these technical?
One of the most awkward things and this is like not hybrid events specifically, more in-person event. And now, we're, like we said, we're integrating a lot of hybrid stuff and hybrid aspects into this, is where the onstage presence of the MC or the pre-MC, whoever's doing sometimes they're called room hosts. They
Yeah.
basically give like the housekeeping rules. If you're not preparing the onstage person properly, then it's really awkward for the people sitting in the room.
Yeah.
Now we are going to try and bring in an online presenter. Well, you don't have to say that. You could say, oh, now we have a message from this person, or okay, we're going to go to the next portion of our program, and not basically say like you're almost setting it up for it to fail. Like, now we're going
Right.
to try and bring someone in. So
Yeah.
I think
And
that's
yeah,
real
when
awkward.
somebody might get stuck there though if they hadn't practiced that in advance. So again, like one thing you can do to avoid that is have that person who's going to be moving that person on the screen
Mhm.
actually practice that a couple times, so they're it's easy for them at the moment,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Because you don't want to have multiple minutes between online and in-person presenters, otherwise you just keep losing the audience, right?
Yeah. Some of the things we talk about, we say, okay, what's that keyword that I'm supposed to hear for when I'm supposed to bring up the next slide or the next person, right? Are you going to intro them? Is there going to be a something that you cue me to saying it without saying specifically, I want to bring up John Harris? That's great. Okay, I want to bring up John Harris. Great. That's a easy transition.
Yeah.
But so, oh, I'm gonna try to do this. It doesn't flow well and it's
Yeah.
awkward.
Awesome. Okay.
Um,
um
yeah, the
yeah.
key takeaway here is don't let the audience sitting there know what's happening behind the scenes. Like, it should be smooth for them.
Yeah, fair. Okay. And yeah, another one I've been seeing is just not having an assigned tech. And so this is like the one of the worst things. Like, it's obviously hard to host an event. It's
Mhm.
hard, a lot harder to try to host an event and run like a live stream at the same time and bring on remote presenters. Like, good
Yeah.
luck. You're a wizard if you can do it. But I don't know anybody that can actually get it done that smooth. And what
Mhm.
I've seen is the worst like next option is they're like, oh well, we'll have an online host and an in-person host, and then it's like, well no, then you have two leaders and then nobody's
Mhm.
leading, and then it's all
Mhm.
mixed up and there's no communication, right?
Right.
So much better to have like a dedicated host
Mhm.
that's maybe even running the event, and then have like, if you can just have one other person, have that other person be a producer.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people want to be on camera, like, oh, I'm going to host and do the online audience, but like you said, it's confusing because that you're focused on the online audience. You have no idea what's happening on stage. You're not talking to that online person or on stage person, and it's just awkward. So I think you can still have two hosts technically, but someone that's not leading and or behind the scenes, right? Like, oh, welcome to the session. They're chatting. Don't need to be on camera. It's no
Right.
need for that. And that all goes back to the right software. I mean, we've seen people
Yeah.
use Zoom. Seen people use, I use StreamYard a lot. There's really, you can really dictate who's up on stage in that
Yeah.
sense. But we
Yeah.
always have to talk about what happens for the online audience at the same time that the in-person audience is like getting water or like taking their seats. Like it's a completely different experience for the in-person audience. A tech, not having an assigned tech will make you do a tech check. I think you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
Like doing one like a week before, a couple days before, making sure that they're clear on the desired outcome for both audiences, and kind of answering all those questions that might come up on the day of that you don't have time to get answered because people are, the MC shows up late or the speaker can't find parking.
Right.
You really don't have the opportunity to talk about that. So you have to do all the tech checks
Right.
beforehand.
Yeah, and that it goes in so many layers. It's not just having just doing it once on site. It's not doing it once a week in advance. It's like making sure, when you book the place, which might be a year in advance, does it have
Mhm.
a solid Wi-Fi connection? Does it have
Mhm.
built-in AV? Can you look at an event where somebody else has already live streamed from there?
Mhm.
Right? Like
Yeah.
if you can't find any of those options, if it doesn't tick those boxes, like don't use that place because
Yeah.
then there's really nothing you can do if you don't at least have good internet and good video and good sound.
Mhm.
You're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Uh, and then
Or communicate that could be an issue if you don't have good internet. Like you
yeah,
need to be prepared for, oh, we're having technical issues. Like we'll be recording this event and just hit record on your camera and have a separate backup camera
yeah,
that can record and present it later on. I mean, that's really key, I think, in general, because you may not be able to fix the connection issue, even if you test it multiple days in advance.
right.
Someone else might be hogging that up on the day of. So,
Yeah, and then so in advance you get your remote presenters, like them tech checked, and then when you get to the site, like if I was doing an event, I'd be showing up at least the night before,
mm-hmm,
making sure that everything actually works. There was time to fix things if they didn't.
mm-hmm,
Who knows? Like worst case scenario is like I think you're going to be running an event this
mm-hmm.
week, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't be checking any of my equipment under the plane. It'd be
No.
all like in my
Oh,
lap
yeah.
and I'd be clutching it tight. Like nobody
Yes.
is getting in between me and my equipment because that's like one of those tiny little things that could go wrong. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be on a last minute shopping trip or
Yeah. And, a lot of producers, they don't necessarily have all the equipment with them. They have to rent from their team members if there's
yeah,
some backup things. And like, I can't, like, I'm preparing for if this doesn't work, then this will work. If this doesn't work, then this, like, I literally have 3 different backup plans and I'm going to carry on my luggage and it's
yeah,
going to be heavy, but
yeah,
I don't care because I don't want to worry about something getting stuck at the airport and then I can't get it. So
yeah.
yeah, always have an assigned tech, and that doesn't have to be an expert. They just have to be able to manage that aspect of your event.
Yeah, just so one, just delegation of responsibility. The host needs to worry about the crowd experience in front of them,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
like just to be able to delegate everything. I,
Mm-hmm.
I just can't imagine being able to actually host an event and actually run a full slate of online and in person
Mm-hmm.
presenters at the same time. I
No,
just it's just about impossible. Yeah,
I won't do it. Nope.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what would be another thing that could go wrong, John?
For full hybrid events, just really bad experience for remote attendees.
Yeah.
There's so many ways this can go wrong. Um, yeah, and it's hard to back up. Like, how far do we go? But let's just talk about like the day of experience. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, the worst thing probably is bad sound. right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you tune into an online event and you can't hear what people are saying, you're leaving like immediately. Like you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
see people moving around a stage, even if the picture was perfect. If you just see people moving around the stage and you can't hear anything, you're gone.
Right.
Right? Um, so having that tested in advance, super important. The other thing is next thing is like seeing them is important, but not nearly as important as the audio experience,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And then finally being able to interact a little bit, being able
Mm-hmm.
to have some way to have your presence at the event be known. Otherwise, really it's tough to keep people unless you have like a superstar speaker on stage. It's going to be tough
Mm-hmm.
to keep people if they can't interact in some way, because at that point you're basically competing with Netflix and every other streaming service out there. Like if you're not offering potential interaction, then you're kind of competing. Then you're just offering like one stream, and people can. There's a lot more, probably more entertaining streams out there than yours.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this prior on like episode 5 about live streaming your event. Um, I think a lot of people want to live stream because they think that's cool, like we can add this on, but they don't think about the remote attendees and building in some type of engagement or, acknowledgement that they're there. They've spent, they've registered potentially, they put it on their calendar and they're showing up, and you're not even having a basic message that says add your comments in the chat, we'll take Q&A later on,
Yeah.
or submit, have a QR code like, oh, you want to be entered into a raffle, whatever, some type of
Right.
engagement, so that I know that I am, my time that I spent to RSVP and show up to this event is worth it.
Yeah.
Because why am I there?
Yeah.
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as having someone that's going to manage the chat that's from the host or representing the host that says, thank you for joining us. That's a great question. Hi, Jon. Thank you for joining us. Just a
Totally.
little
Yeah.
small acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just in the beginning, but like, wow, like they acknowledged that I was here. That's really cool. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's like, oh, wow, there's people in the room there that are getting their one-on-one access with the speakers potentially after the fact or whatever, but at least they know that like I'm here and I'm, engaging. So,
Right. And there's ways you can make that even more engaging if you're using something like StreamYard. You can bring, if they've submitted a chat comment, you can bring that on screen.
mhm,
Then they know everybody can see that, and it's like that's a really engaging aspect, right?
mhm,
Something you can do if you're using something like Buzzit is if people have submitted their comment, then you can bring their whole profile on screen and be like, oh, Jon,
mhm,
thanks for joining us from Vancouver. Here's your question for the speaker, right? And then that
mhm,
that that really brings presence for that person to
mhm,
that remote to that on location event.
mhm.
Um, One other item that I've seen as like a no for kind of messing it up for the remote attendees is not sharing the presentation slides in the stream.
Yeah,
And so it's like you can see the presenter and they're like referencing this thing in the background, but like you can't, it's not plugged in. And
yeah,
for some reason, it's like it seems like the easiest thing to do. If you have your one on stage laptop sharing like to the projector,
mhm,
then if you have that connected into the StreamYard studio, then the producer can easily
mhm.
be sharing that on the stream, right? And so you can
Yes.
usually have side by side presentation and speaker.
And you bring up a good point because we're talking about experience for the remote attendees, someone engaging in the chat, bringing up someone's question, like that can be managed by one person. And then you need the tech person to be able to make sure to execute it. So those are two different roles. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people try to say, okay, you're going to manage our hybrid event. Now let's have you do it all. Like bring up the comment from the chat, make sure the speaker's showing up, make sure the audio is good. I'm like, yeah, you could do that. But they don't do that in TV studios. There's like
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you've seen them behind the scenes, it's one person operating the camera, one person calling the shots, and then like,
Right.
getting the audience to like clap and stuff. There's like 3 or 4 people minimum
Yeah.
behind the camera. So I think I always try to use those analogies when we're talking about events with people because you can't just do it all. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
but yeah, I think all of these things that aren't thought about during setting up a hybrid event. We're aiming so that you don't screw it up. You can actually have a really cool hybrid event. So, what the one bad experience? I think the worst one out of all of these that we mentioned, my opinion, and you can tell me what yours is the bad experience for the remote attendees because that's the whole reason for hybrid.
Yeah, well, for the in-person attendees too, if you're an in-person attendee and you see I've seen the worst remote presentations, like why am
Mhm.
I sitting here through this? And it's like sometimes it's not that person's fault. Sometimes it's like they had bad internet that day, but that's why you submit that video in advance, right? Um,
Mhm.
and but yeah, so it goes both ways. If you're an audience member,
Mhm.
um, in any case, it's like you if you're showing up, if you're spending the time, the money, you're
Mhm.
hoping that your host has actually spent the time to make it a good use of your time, right?
Yes, you're right. It is in person or online attendees that can totally make or break your event because they're
Yeah,
like, "Oh, I just went to this event. I'll never go again."
yeah,
You don't often get like another chance to make it better for.
right. Oh, one thing we didn't mention about just like making it smoother on stage experience. Um,
Mhm.
and this is one of the easiest things, like just for a tip, like to make it easier for the whole show. If you're having your on stage laptop that's running all the presentations, I've seen people be like, let each speaker bring up their own laptop. And we're like, oh, we're going to let them plug in now. And like, how long is that going to take? And they're going to open their slides and blah, blah, blah. Everybody needs to submit their slides to you, the host,
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
advance. Those all
Mhm.
need to be on one laptop in one folder, nothing else open on a computer. So it's super easy for the host to
Yes.
switch between slide decks. And best practice is use only PDFs. Because if you have 5 speakers and one's using Keynote and one's using PowerPoint and one's using like some other type of slideshow, and you're trying
Mhm.
to switch through all of them, there's like basically no way you can make that not clunky, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think to go one up on that is create a template in Google Slides and then submit it to the speakers and be like, "Here, fill
Yeah,
in all of your information." So that way you have one uniform branded way of presenting your slides and it's not one font from this presenter and another
right.
font from this presenter and like bright orange in this one and pink and purple, and it's like that doesn't
You
work
want it to
with
be all consistent. Yeah,
overall. And I mean you can easily create some type of template and then if they don't finish it, I mean you can call them and be like, "Hey, what do I need to put in this?"
yeah,
Type it up, download it as a PDF. But that's all mitigating risk and
yeah.
doing your proper
And these are
planning.
like, so that is a cheap thing to make your event so much better. Just to have everybody submit their slides in advance. Like that's
Mhm.
the lowest cost way to like 10x your event impact.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that can all be done with so little tech. Like you have one laptop on stage, one laptop for the producer that's
Mhm.
off stage running everything, right? It's like
Right.
that's as much as you need. Speaking of tech, we haven't talked about, I think maybe the worst thing is when there's bad audio issues, right? So when
Yeah.
you're in person and there's like an echo in the room or there's feedback or whatever,
Mhm.
this is easy to avoid if you just like, for me, just like mapping it out, just drawing it on paper, like where's each microphone going to be, where's each speaker going to be, and just
Mhm.
making sure that those things aren't going to touch. Like,
Yeah. And I think people overcomplicate it when it comes to the online because they want to have the online experience, but they don't have 6 cameras with
yeah,
6 microphones because they just don't have that.
yeah,
Right. So there in this case, and I'm going to talk through this one that I'm going to do this later this week. What we're intending to do is have one wide shot from a
Yeah.
laptop
Yeah.
of the whole panel. So we're not going to have the what we normally do in a virtual event. You have close-ups like you and I right now. We're close
Yeah.
up and we talk. We have each our own microphones, but we're going to have one laptop, one webcam or a Mevo, have two
Yeah.
separate camera sources, and then one directional mic plugged
Yeah.
in that will
Perfect.
be right around like the speaker output for the room, right? So it's not going to
Yeah.
be on top of it where you can't hear,
Yeah.
right? Like muffled, but it's going to be with intention that the on-site AV works properly.
Yeah.
Now we also have an on-site AV person that should be able to assist in the event that there's like too much feedback or we have to move it back somewhere, right? So we're all going to be testing that, but we're not trying to hook up 6 different microphones
Yeah.
plus a remote microphone when someone wants to take a question in the
Yeah.
audience. We're
Totally.
saying, hey, let's just have this one camera source and one mic source,
Yeah.
and maybe one more additional mic source without a
Yeah.
camera that we can capture like the audience, and that'll be turned off once we're ready to
Totally.
do the show
Yeah.
because we don't need someone's laughing or
So
or
rules with microphones,
yeah.
the less the better,
Oh yes.
right? If you do have to have more than one, always have the extra ones turned off when you don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always just directional mics, just only directional mics, so
Mm-hmm.
that they don't pick up the whole room, they don't pick up potential feedback, and then really, really big mufflers on those mics,
Yeah.
so that they only pick something up when people are speaking directly into them. And then, like, if you've done that, you've basically eliminated every potential feedback issue or echo issue, right?
Mm-hmm. And test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can get very overwhelmed with the audio part because it seems simple. Let me plug in my laptop and here's a camera. Some of these webcams also have microphones, and maybe that's your audio source, but you have to test it and make sure that it works for your desired outcome.
Right.
We don't want your hybrid event to blow up.
Yeah. So yeah, like recapping key takeaways, like, are the for the major issues, it's really just comes down to a little bit of planning,
Mm-hmm.
maybe using the right products,
Yes.
and then
Um,
practicing.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Like the one where you said submit a video of the presentation or have a backup video,
Yeah.
that's planning, right?
Yeah.
Like just very basic. If you feel like this person can't show up to a tech check, if they're too busy, they're a VIP, always have a backup plan.
Yeah.
Or you just eliminate them out of the show. Say, hey, we make that decision. We don't have anything as a backup. We're just
Yeah.
gonna move on.
Totally.
Communicate that.
Yeah.
Don't make the audience know what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's very, very key. My favorite, always do a tech check at least a day before. And I'm always doing tech checks prior to the actual tech check because I want to make sure that we address all the issues when there's actually everyone there and present.
Yeah.
And the final one is don't forget about your remote attendees. Don't make it a bad experience for them because that's not good. They'll tell the world. You don't want to upset the online audience. So yeah, I mean, I love talking about this stuff because I think a lot of people don't think about it when
Yeah.
they're planning an event.
It's so much fun. I think it will be one of those things that kind of turns into like common knowledge over the next few years, but it is going to take a few years. But
Mm-hmm.
it's fun to just be working on it,
Yeah.
and to like just to be helping people kind of get there the first time,
Mm-hmm.
because hybrid events can be scary the first time. There's lots of things that can go wrong, but if you just have the right prep,
Yeah.
then it's actually pretty easy once you're doing
I know they can be scary. I've had bad dreams about them already.
it.
I'll be fine. I do enough prep, so I'm sure I'll be good. So I can't wait to give my feedback on this to you personally. But if we talk about anything that I learned from this event, it'll definitely be a new episode in the
Yeah,
future.
can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our Riz Pod and biggest mistakes to avoid with your hybrid event. My name is Marissa.
And I'm Jon.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, till next time.
Thanks for watching Resilient Events. With real-life examples and events expertise, they'll help you finish planning and start doing. Only on the 100 TV network. Visit rizpod.live for show extras and freebies.